A phase one trade deal has been signed by China and the U.S. and Washington in a bid to alleviate almost 2 years of trade tensions. How much will this deal benefit businesses in both countries? And for the first time in 2 decades, a Chinese leader is about to commence a 2-day visit to Myanmar. What can we expect from President Xi Jinping's trip to the Southeast Asian country? Welcome to The Point, an opinion show coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Li Qiuyuan, sitting in for Liu Xin. Now, China and the U.S. formally signed their Phase 1 economic and trade agreement after nearly 2 years of deadlock. On Wednesday, China's chief negotiator, Vice Premier Liu He, and U.S. President Donald Trump signed the document at the White House. Liu delivered Chinese President Xi Jinping's message, which said the deal is good not only for the U.S. and China, but also for the whole world. Trump proclaimed the signing of the trade deal as, quote, one that has never been taken before with China towards the future of fair and reciprocal trade. Now, one centerpiece, though, of the deal is the pledge by China to purchase at least $200 billion in additional U.S. goods and services over the next 2 years. So, how historic is this landmark deal? Can the target of $200 billion be reached? And how strictly will the two countries implement the deal? I'm now joined from Washington, D.C. by James Early, CEO of Stansberry, China, and Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics here in Beijing. Thank you so much for joining us, to you both. So let me start with Professor Liu here in Beijing with me. So you have a huge amount of experience and expertise in economics and trade. You have personally followed very closely of the China-U.S. trade war over the past 2 years. How historic is this? What do you think?
Well, it is really a landmark because the two biggest economies had a roller coaster relationship in trade and investment, but the fundamentals are there. And now with the unpredictability going on in the Trump government, it seems that there has to be a restructuring of the trade and economic relations, but now it is really something that is finally settled. I believe that it is really showing to the world that a rational engagement are finally over there after all the crossfire, after all the injuries that has created. There has been a roller coaster development, but it is in the end it is the business community, it is the consumers that are there to demand that there has to be a constructive engagement.
And the U.S. market is already reacting to it. James, let me bring you in. U.S. stocks rose after the signing of the deal, to our knowledge. As a business entrepreneur, how do you feel? I mean, what does it mean for U.S. business there? What kind of reaction have they had to the news of the deal?
Well, I say this half jokingly, but I think everybody's just happy that something happened. I mean, this has been dragging on for a long, long time. And people on both sides have been wondering, when is something finally going to be signed? So that's a relief. Now, there are a million detractors, and I've been one of them saying this doesn't mean that much. There are still bigger issues to contend with. There's still the application of the deal. So I won't detract from the detractors, except to say that at least things aren't worsening. And that's really good news. You know, the U.S.-China trade relationship was in a hole, relatively speaking, and the digging has stopped. And this is a really positive thing, and markets are reacting accordingly and appropriately, I would say.
Now, President Donald Trump proclaimed the signing of the deal as a momentous step, saying that one that has never been taken before with China, as I mentioned, toward a future of fair and reciprocal trade. And the Chinese president, President Xi Jinping, called the deal good for China, good for U.S. and the whole world. But are both sides truly satisfied with the result, Professor Liu? What have both sides benefited from the deal, and perhaps more crucially, what kind of concessions have both sides made?
I think the most important part is the basic consensus both sides have reached. And initially, over the past almost 2 years, and there has been ill understanding, and there has been inflammatory rhetorics against each other, and there has been, the realistic measures to injure each other. It has eventually injure themselves. But now the basic consensus there that by rational engagement and people can really benefit. The benefit China can receive is very obvious. I think it is not really the part for the protection of intellectual properties, but overall, for China to be more aware of the need for elevation of its rule of law in the protection of intellectual property rights, in the streamlining of the differences in the treatment versus different type of ownership entities, be it foreign firms, be it the domestic private firms and state-owned firms, etc. And also to further understand the importance of trade imbalance is also very important, because after all, China has been enjoying the trade surplus with over 120 countries, and this is something that China will have to do to reduce the excessive trade imbalance. On the U.S. side, of course, the immediate gain is really to sell a lot more goods, $200 billion worth of goods over the next 2 years and also the years to come, and that's quite a relief to those, particularly those who have been suffering from the trade war, the farmers and many other manufacturers, etc. And also Donald Trump is also a big winner, because that he wins a lot more applause from his constituencies, particularly over the very sensitive period of his re-election campaign, and the fact that yesterday, he was making a big show on himself, and to show that how much he has really brought the benefit to the U.S. And of course, the whole world has been really also a beneficiary, because the uncertainty looming large and the disruption caused by the trade war over the global supply chain does really hurt the global economy by 0.8 or even 1%. So now I think both sides has seized the fire, and hopefully over the next stage, the U.S. can really roll back the punitive tariff, and then we come here to rebuild our trust and move ahead.
So speaking about addressing the trade imbalance, let's take a look at the one centerpiece of the deal. According to this deal, during the 2-year period from January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021, China shall ensure the purchases and imports into China from the U.S. of the manufactured goods, agricultural goods, energy products, and services identified in Annex 6.1 exceed the corresponding 2017 baseline amount by no less than $200 billion US. James, what do you think that has prompted China to expand its imports from the U.S.? How is U.S. looking at it? Is it just a matter of China addressing U.S. concern on the trade deficit with China? And how do you think this will impact China's domestic industries and enhance China's commitment?
Sure. Well, let me just say, Cho-Young, you read that in a way that makes it sound very exciting. So well done for a contract. China is smart, and they know that Trump is very sensitive to the trade deficit and trade balance, even though, frankly, it doesn't necessarily by itself mean very much. I mean, a trade imbalance just means one country buys more than it exports, and that's not necessarily a sign of unfair practice per se. But they know that these are Trump states that export a lot of these things. By one of my analyst calculations, this will mean a 62% increase yearly in agricultural purchases from the U.S., which is great, for Trump, obviously. In terms of China's trading partners, I think that, the main headlines, at least, are this is going to hurt the substitute purchases, like from South America in agricultural goods and from Australia in some energy, like natural gas. But I agree with Professor Liu's optimism that overall this is great news for the world, not just in a direct economic sense, but in a symbolic sense. The fighting the skirmish has cooled down.
Another key topic is, of course, the IP protection. When talking about the deal, Congressman Darren LaHood said in the interview on Fox Business that the U.S. has a, quote, hammer over China in terms of intellectual property and technology transfers. Professor Liu, how do you read his remarks? Do China's commitments stem from U.S. pressure, or does it reflect its own domestic reforms?
Well, the the sense of intellectual property is really a latecomer for China. As a matter of fact, when China joined the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, in the early 80s. And so we do admit that there, given this, that the development level and given the short history of intellectual property protection, there has been a lot of problems going on. But I visibly see that China is really improving year by year. You do not see pirate CDs on the street anymore, and you do not really see outright trademark infringement, etc. So it's on a steady improvement, and the government has been making strenuous efforts. One is that really that we joined all the global treaties, be it Madrid Convention, Paris Industrial Property Protection, be it the Berne Convention on Copyright Protection, etc. And we have really a holistic type of legislation today. And now also China is also stepping up the judicial part in setting up the IP court at the midterm cities and supported by the special IP court of the Supreme Court, etc. So it's really there, and also lawyers are getting more and more educated to support that. So overall, it really fits the critical juncture when China is really shifting from the massive efficiency economy into innovation-driven economy. That's in the need of China, and also that can really build a responsible image for China to attract more foreign investment, and particularly those technology-intensive industries into China.
So now the deal is there. James, how much faith do you have when it comes to the implementations? I mean, given the fact that there were several setbacks in the trade negotiations and U.S. pulled back from some agreements it had signed, are you worried about the implementation of the Phase 1 deal, even if it has been signed? Is there a risk that the deal will be dropped and the tariffs will be reimposed?
I think so. Let me just jump in on the IP point for a second. I mean, a cynic might also say that a lot of this IP interest in China is coming at the time that China now has some of its own IP to protect as well, which, okay, I mean, I understand that, but I still agree with Professor Liu that it's fundamentally the right action to take, and I'm happy to see that. In terms of the market or the world's reaction to the application or the enforceability of the deal, the commodity markets have been a little bit soft. I would say, meaning I think there's skepticism about whether China, which, for example, in agricultural goods purchased at most $26 billion a year from the U.S. before, at its high point, can really ramp that up to, I forgot the number, but it's going to be a much bigger number per year. I'm going to watch and see. I think there is a lot of skepticism, but that also opens the door for China and the U.S. to sort of surprise on the upside, because I think that skepticism is already going to be priced in. So it can only get better from here, and I hope it can only get better from here.
Lastly, before we go, how optimistic are you guys about a Phase 2 deal? Because President Trump has already proposed a China trip to talk about the Phase 2 deal. Professor Liu first.
Well, I'm rather optimistic, given that Phase 1, after almost 2 years of the communication, we are finally over there, and that really set the tonality to move forward. And also, it's quite a learning process on both sides to learn about the real situation and the large differences lying in institutional setting, in different history, etc. So, given all the tuitions that we have paid, I think the second phase can be accelerated, and the trust can be restored and reconsolidated. And then, because I do see that the second phase has a lot to do with what is already agreed with the first phase is more of implementation. Of course, the focus would be more on structural changes, the industrial subsidies, etc. So I think the basic principles are there, and it won't be as difficult as the first phase.
James, your thoughts?
Yeah, we'll see how the implementation goes. That's going to be a key point. But, this first phase was reached because both sides agreed that they at least want to stop the bleeding and they want good news to report back to their countries. Second phase is going to be a lot more difficult because it's going to deal with maybe some more IP protection, but the state support of certain industries, which the U.S. is going to say, that's cheating. China's going to say, that's our model. That's a lot tougher nut to crack. I hope it can happen, but we'll see.
All right, thanks so much, James Early, CEO of Stansberry, China, and Professor Liu Baocheng from the University of International Business and Economics.